You ever wonder why some days you feel like you can do no wrong as an actor? Your creativity is alive, you feel playful, you feel good, while other days you feel like you've never acted a day in your life? Today, I'm going to share with you the secret to consistent performances and the key to unlocking extraordinary ones, and why both are vital to your career. Hey guys, my name's Hans Christopher. I am an actor, coach, and creator of the Working Actor series. If you haven't downloaded the 3-step memorization guide, do so at the link below. And with that, I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. Let's dive in. Is navigating between the fundamentals versus your creative potential. I'm just going to make it real simple. This is basically floors versus ceilings, right? The concept of floors and ceilings came to me probably about 7 years into my acting career. It's something we kind of naturally do without knowing it, but as I see with everything, I think once you're able to start naming stuff, you can approach it and kind of attack it in a different way. You can be more precise, and you can get to a place where you can really start to hone in on specific skills, specific parts, and little elements of your craft. So, with that said, let's just define really quick what a floor is versus what your ceiling is, right? You probably already have a little bit of an understanding of it. Um, but a floor, when it comes to acting or it comes to your art, your floor is how you show up on your worst day, right? So it's basically all things that could go wrong went wrong. How do you show up? What is your craft like? How are you going to show up that day? Goes back to that James Clear definition, or the quote that I love so much. We don't rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our systems, right? When it's the worst day, when that director's angry at you or everything's got changed around, how are you going to show up? What does that look like? And then, as you can guess, ceiling is basically how you show up on your best day. When everything's going right, when everything's been set in place, your partner is amazing, you guys are vibing, the director and you have this thing worked out, and it just feels like magic is happening. Um, Now, I'm guessing you can guess what situation normally happens. Life on set is absolute chaos, and for the majority of the time, most of the time, especially at the beginning of your career, you are going to be relying on your floor much more than you'll be able to be in a place to allow your ceiling to show up. Um, your ceiling work, or at least how it's worked with me and what I've done, is it's almost like magic. It's almost like coaxing or growing a plant. You don't know when it's going to show up or when it's not going to show up. All you can do is kind of set the conditions, plant the soil, water the plant, do things, but you don't know what's going to come up. And in that way, it's kind of like magic, but when you do the work in that, unbelievable things show up. So that's the definition of floor versus ceiling. Let me give you a few examples of kind of why why this came up for me. I don't know if you guys are familiar with like the NBA or NFL draft. When they draft these athletes, these players, the incredible athletes, professional athletes, they evaluate them and they usually talk about this player has a high floor. This player over here doesn't have as high of a floor, but he has a high ceiling, right? And so what does that mean is that the one player with a high floor comes in and does consistent work. You know what you're going to get. But that person with a high ceiling has potential, the potential to be great, the potential to be something amazing. Both these elements are vital and incredibly important in our acting career, and knowing when to put more focus on one versus the other uh, is going to save you. Well, I'll tell you why with me in a second, but it can save you a tremendous amount of money, time, effort, um, and the like. So, first of all, let me just give you my example. It was about year 7 that I started to realize I was going to. I was taking a class that was a great class, but the class would do auditions. It would give you auditions 2 or 3 days before the class started. It would put you in a scenario as if you were getting these auditions from an agent or a manager, and then you'd have 2 days to work on them, and then you'd put them up in class as if that was the audition. Sometimes we would do it on tape. It was a great class to get me to understand the game, the way it works in the real world. I didn't have an agent yet, but it allowed me to understand how the process worked, right? The class was a floor raising class. Um, because it got me to a place where I was doing things over and over. But what I found is over the course of a few years, that class, I ended up having the same notes when I go back and look at everything I did. My notes was always more specific. I didn't have my life behind the eyes. I didn't have emotional depth. And I started to realize that this level of work wasn't showing up consistently, you know? So what I ended up doing is I ended up taking a step back and jumping into another class that I knew in talking to other people and talking to what they knew. This was another class that was more about life behind the eyes, in-depth work, what I call digging for boulders, right? Now, both of them are important. The first one is more like picking up pebbles or getting dirt. You're still compiling stuff and doing things that are important. The other one is deep emotional life work for character development, things that you're going to be working on for months and months, sometimes years. And they are both absolutely important. Now, why this showed up for me was because at about year 7, I started to get to a point where I was now incorporating my business. I was feeling pretty good about myself. I'd started working on short films, student films, got my first credit. But what I'd find is certain times I would show up and I would be unbelievable. I would do something and it would just be on a whole nother level. And then the next day, for whatever reason, something would happen and I would get in my head and it was as if I'd never acted before a day in my life. Fall on my face, uncomfortable, embarrassed. The creativity in life was completely gone. Within 2 days, my ceiling would show up and then my floor would show up. And the difference in those things for me at that time was drastic. It was massive. And let me just tell you right now, that is not the place you want to be. You do not want to be an inconsistent actor in this game. That is a recipe for disaster. So that got me thinking about this concept of floor versus ceiling and how I could start implementing tools and things to raise my floor so I could put up consistent work, consistently good work, consistently strong work. And then also how I could do things to put up or raise and work on my ceiling work, or my potential, if that big role did come in, when I started getting those roles where I had to get to emotional depth and life. Let me give you an example of floor work that really opened my eyes to the power of how important doing floor work was. One of my good friends who I worked with at the time, he was one of those actors who saw me kind of going through my rise and saw what I was doing as I made that switch. And he would come up to me and he would ask me, he's like, "What are you doing? What are you doing today?" Because I was always trying new things. I was always doing something weird and crazy. And he would be like, "What are you doing today? Hans, come on, tell me, what are you doing today?" And I would just tell him. I would literally lay it out for him. I was like, "Okay, this is what I did. I went to AFI, I did these things." And he would follow it and do it. And I slowly watched him kind of build his career. It was awesome. And then something really cool happened. He started thinking outside of the box and doing things that I hadn't even thought of doing. He ended up becoming a reader for one of these workshop classes. And I didn't see him for about a year, 2 years. He ended up moving. And then he came back and I helped him read a tape. And his level of work had changed so much from him just reading, being a reader and reading these things in front of casting and being in these classes. But it had changed so much that it was apparent how he was showing up in the audition. He wasn't putting anything on it. And you could tell that he was just comfortable picking up dialogue and going and talking. And it really transformed his work. He'd put a significant amount of work in over the last year, 2 years of elevating and raising his floor as an actor, right? So that's an example of that. And a few examples of that I think that can be amazing for raising your floor. Now here's an example in reverse. I worked with an actress on a film. She's a great actress. And we had this scene and it started and we did the first scene. We did the first take of the scene. And at the end of the scene, she killed it. The first scene was great. Something happened. Usually, what happens on set is something wasn't right, or a light was out, or something didn't work properly, and so we had to do it again. So we did it again, and she did it in the exact same way. And the director liked it, but then he wanted something different. He asked her to change some stuff, and she wasn't able to switch. And as we did it more and more, you could see kind of this starting out, and then the precipitation drop going down that followed. And that was kind of an example of it in the opposite of her floor came, or her floor came in strong, but the second she was asked to elevate her to get to another level, it started dropping. So that's an example of that. Now, some examples that you can use for floor that are great are things like rehearsing, or that have worked for me. Rehearsing scenes, reading in situations like I talked about with my buddy. The memorization technique came out of that. So working on, and you can think of things for yourself. Just start asking yourself, where is my class at in terms of elevating? Is it elevating my floor, or is this a class where I'm elevating my ceiling? The example I used earlier was after I got out of that class where I was doing that audition work. I got into a class that worked on deep emotional life. You'd work on the same scene sometimes for a year or 2 years, the same 2, 3 pages, 4 pages of a scene, and that showed me a level of depth to what you could work on. You get the same thing if you work in a play, if you're doing things for a long time, or in films. If you're working on a film, if you're working on projects where you have to get to that really deep emotional life, connecting kind of what's going on here with what's really happening when you're speaking your truth and doing some of these things we talked about with your superpowers, you can really start to get to a place where that deep work starts showing up. Those boulders start getting unearthed. And the thing is when you unearth those boulders and when you start doing that ceiling work, it will start showing up more and more in your auditions. They start becoming synonymous almost in the way that they work as you do it for a long time. Now, that said, if you're starting out your career, I think it's incredibly important to focus on, or at least for me, don't do what I did. Don't wait 7 years before you start saying, I need to elevate my floor work. That's just the whole concept of the 100 tapes and repetition and doing it over and over came from the concept of raising your floor. At the beginning of your career, you want to get yourself to a level where your floor, you're consistent. You show up and casting goes, I know what I'm going to get from them, right? Now, as you get to yourself to a level where you're consistent, where you get to be to a place where you're getting callbacks, you're getting in the rooms, you're getting known, then I would say really start honing in and focusing on that boulder work, that deep emotional prep, that work that's going to cause you to have to really dive in. Because if you start doing that work first and you're not getting on sets, or you're not in plays, or you're not doing things to be able to use that, it's just not going to be able to show up, and you're not going to be able to use it in auditions if you're going out for co-stars and some of the smaller guest star stuff. It's just, you just don't have the opportunity to use it yet. So that said, if you can start taking this into your craft, into your work, it's going to help you immensely. Just to be able to start questioning and saying, okay, how can I use this in this process right here? Okay, I've been in this class for 6 months, and I've been working on this stuff. I think I've been elevating my floor, but have I been doing anything to work on my ceiling? So I'll leave you guys with this. I know this is a quick lesson today, but I'll leave you with this. Just go ahead and look into what your work and what you're doing, and ask yourself, where are some elements where I can raise my floor, and where are some elements where I can raise my ceiling, and what I can do. I'll give you some more examples I think that are great for raising your floor early on. Are improv classes, UCB, in different improv classes, just to build that play state and that world around you. Voice, any kind of thing that you're working on, a skill or something, it's a great just floor raising thing that can kind of get you to a place where you're putting up consistent work and people know what they're going to get. I think at the beginning of your career, that is the most important thing you can do. And then as opportunities come, you've got to be able to pick it up and get into some of that deep emotional life, some of that connected work. So hope that helped. Let's open up to questions, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's lesson and this dirty hat. And if you have any comments on how to raise your floor or raise your ceiling, I'd love to hear in the comments below. So see you next time.